Hi, I'm Robbie Baer. I'm a professor in the anthropology department.
And when did you start working on the Burmese garden project?
Um, a year and a half ago, something like that. I've been doing a study with the Burmese on health issues, and I guess I guess the garden people had heard about it. I had met some of them, and they asked me to be on the advisory board for the garden.
Was this before or after the garden was established?
The garden, I think, was going in a very small way before I got involved. But I think when they got the federal grant from ORR, they needed an advisory board. And I think that's the point at which I became involved.
And how are you involved now?
Well, I go to advisory board meetings, and I have several of my classes doing projects, gathering various sorts of research data that will ostensibly help the garden. I've been doing all sorts of other stuff with the garden. I've been trying to help the garden make contacts with restaurants to sell their food and markets to sell their produce. And I've taken the Burmese to U-Pick stands and places like that to learn about other places to get fruits and vegetables. So I've just been trying to do whatever I can.
So could you just address how you particularly benefit from being involved in a project?
How I benefit. Well, I get to spend a whole lot of my time helping out with the garden. I'm concerned about social welfare of people, social justice, all of that, so I guess I benefit by working on a project that's going to help make people's lives better. How else do I benefit? My students are doing some research related to the garden, so ultimately we'll get some publications. My students get good experiences.
And how are the Burmese, you think, benefiting from the project?
From the garden? They are getting free produce and other kinds of food from the garden. I think some of them are starting to get more experiences dealing with Americans and becoming more integrated into American society. And my hope is that the garden will become a endeavor where people can make money at it. There are a lot of Burmese without a lot of formal education, with a lot of English skills, who were farmers back home, and this would be a really good way for them to be able to make a living while they, sort of do catch up on their English.
And would you say the Burmese contribute to the operation and maintenance and future plans for the garden?
From my perspective, they do. I mean, they're the ones who are actually out there working in the garden, and I've been very concerned as an advisory board member that when anything is done at the garden by outsiders, that they're very careful to teach the Burmese how to do it. So if they're putting in an irrigation system and it's being done by professionals, the Burmese need to know how to maintain it themselves, how to fix it, so they're not becoming dependent on other people. The engineering classes need to make sure that any of their expertise about putting together the greenhouse is shared, because they're not going to be available when it tears or breaks and needs to be repaired. So all of that knowledge needs to be transferred to the people who are actually working at the garden.
And I know this is in your reports, but could you just again address how you communicate with the Burmese?
How I communicate
and
with
get
the
feedback
Burmese?
from them. Yeah.
Well, I don't speak any of the right languages. I only speak English and Spanish, and the Burmese speak Burmese or Kaya or Karen, and there's some who speak Chin. So there are a couple of people I've been working with whose English is pretty good. So, we talk in English. I try to use simpler constructions and speak a little more slowly, enunciate more clearly. Or sometimes I've used interpreters also. Any of my research, I try to invite those members of the Burmese community who can understand English to come to the presentation so they understand what we've been doing. And I just try to explain anything that I'm doing. I'm doing a new project looking at what the children eat during the week, particularly at school. So I went to a community meeting held in somebody's apartment, I guess a month or two ago, and I explained to everybody, this is a project I'd like to do. Do you understand what I want to do? Are you okay with it? And, when we're going to start, we'll send permission slips to the parents along with an interpreter. And everybody said, yeah, that's fine. I've been working the Burmese probably around 4 years now, and pretty much people know me. So for anybody, I think, including the engineering students who are working on projects with the Burmese, it's really important that as much of your skills as you can, you transfer to the Burmese. Involve them in what's going on. People have very different levels of skills. They have different levels of English. But the more that those skills and abilities can get transferred to the Burmese, the more they'll be able to manage on their own, which is the ultimate goal of this. We don't need to make the Burmese community more dependent on outsiders. They need to be self-sufficient American citizens. Another very important thing is that any results of projects done need to be conveyed to the Burmese. Now, this can be challenging because there aren't a lot of people who read and write English at this point. So that any written materials need to be written very clearly without any kind of jargon. And they need to be provided to the Burmese, but also the people who interact with them on the garden project, like Pastor Joseph, Father Burhanu, who can then interpret these materials because they're working on a day-to-day basis with the Burmese farmers, and they can help them understand what these reports mean. That's different from just coming up with a 25-page report for somebody to digest. You'd be stumped if you had to do that in Burmese. These folks have really minimal English reading skills at this point. It's probably also good to have a session with the Burmese at the end of any project that any group does. Get an interpreter. There's some members of the community who can interpret pretty well. And there's some members of the garden project, 2 men in particular, 2 of the younger men, whose English is pretty good, and have a session where you just go through, maybe with PowerPoints with lots of visuals, what you did, what it means, how you fix it, etc., and just be prepared to go through it rather slowly so the interpreters can explain it, and you'll be able to field questions from the community about what you did.